Welcome back, college football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and today I want to share with you my Week 12 Top 15 power ratings. And there are only two ground rules to these power ratings, and those are number one, these teams are rated based off of my eye test, FPI, S&P Plus, my own potential power index, K-Ford ratings, points per play margin, any type of analytic I can get my hands on that I think is important, I factor in my head, and then really spit out all of these teams in a list as to who I think are the best teams in college football. And number two is using the criteria of rule number one, I select who I think is the best group of five team in college football, and they must be included inside of this top 15 power ratings. I hope those two rules make sense, and I cannot wait to share my top 15 power ratings with you all, talking about the best group of five team and also the best power four teams and best college football teams. As maybe one day the best group of five team can be one of the best teams in all of college football. But before I get into that and spend anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute on these 15 teams, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, to like the video as well to help us get into the algorithm, and again, hit that subscribe button. We're doing a giveaway at the end of the regular season to celebrate hitting 20,000 subscribers, and it would be awesome to hit 30,000 subscribers in these next few months, even by a miracle at the end of the season, and you can help us do that. Also, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I update this list every week, when I release preview and prediction videos and reaction videos and all types of college football content. Share this video around. Comment your own power ratings down below, whether you just want to do a top 5, top 10, top 15, whatever. I will try my best to respond, and you will also engage with other college football fans in the comments, which is awesome. And last but not least, join the Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we talk college football 24/7. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, you can send a super chat via the comment section, or you can join our Patreon page as a paid member, or purchase merchandise via my merchandise store. And the links to those two, along with the Discord server, are in the description and down below in the pinned comment. But let's kick this off and start off with number 15 in my power ratings, Boise State, who fulfills that second rule of being the best group of five team who has to be included in this list. The Boise State Broncos are 8-1, 5-0 overall. I think they're the best team in the group of five, really because of Ashton Jeanty, but also their offensive line. I think their center, guard, and tackle positions are strong. They have good pass rushers and really a good front on defense that defensive coordinator Eric Chinander has managed. Their weakness is special teams, where they're outside the top 100 in ESPN's special teams efficiency. Their pass defense isn't that good, and quarterback's a little bit questionable. But Ashton Jeanty's an absolute non-negotiable. I think he should be a lock for the Heisman Trophy, barring some insane injury or a complete collapse in terms of performance. He's the best running back in college football, one of the best stories in college football by himself, up there with like Colorado and Indiana as teams. And Boise State, they're a very good team right now, and I think they're on track to reaching the college football playoff. At number 14, we have the BYU Cougars, 9-0, undefeated with a 6-0 record in Big 12 play. Their offensive line is good. Their defense, particularly their defensive backfield at linebacker, corner, and safety, and an awesome special teams unit has helped this team along to win some close games, to dominate some teams as well by the scoreboard, while not necessarily dominating the stat sheet, aka versus Kansas State. I think that their defensive front and their rush defense is a bit of a weakness, bit of a concern, and their offense is inconsistent, especially on the ground. But Kalani Sitake is someone who I was a fan of a few years ago, kind of sold my stock on him entering this preseason, and I regret that because he is putting together one of the best, if not potentially the best coaching job in all of college football right now with what they are doing and how they are winning with this roster. This is a team that is in play to reach the playoff, and yes, power ratings wise, I do think they are one of college football's better teams. Best? No. Better? Yes. Texas A&M's at number 13 here, the Aggies are, and they're 7-2, 5-1 in SEC play. Their only losses are to Notre Dame and obviously to South Carolina, where they suffered a 44-20 blowout loss. And South Carolina's in this list, but we'll get to them in a few seconds here. A&M is a deep running back room. Their offensive line is better than it's ever been under Jimbo Fisher, and their defensive front is strong. I like their special teams unit. This is a disciplined team. They have a great coach in Mike Elko, who I think long-term is a success, and obviously in the short term is a success. Quarterback between Connor Weigman and between Marcel Reed has been very inconsistent. Wide receiver and tight end also don't have very good production. Overall, it's year one under Mike Elko and Jay Bateman and Colin Klein, their two coordinators and their staff. I would say this is a successful year for A&M, and I think they're going to win some more games with some of the cupcakes they have left on the schedule, and they can totally beat Texas at home in the Lone Star Showdown, which I'm very excited for its return in a few weeks. At number 12, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks. South Carolina is the only 3-loss team on this list. They lost to LSU, they lost to Alabama, and honestly, their third loss kind of escapes me here, which is rather bothersome. But yeah, Alabama by 2, barely lost to LSU at home, and who else did South Carolina lose to? Well, I'll figure out eventually, but Shane Beamer has exceeded my expectations for this season. Their defensive line is one of the best in all of college football, and I'm quite frankly impressed with how good they look defensively. Their secondary is good. I mean, Dylan Stewart, one of the best defensive ends in the country as a young player. Oh, they lost to Ole Miss at home, which was a very forgettable game because South Carolina only scored 3 points and Ole Miss kind of game controlled them to death. That was a very forgettable game. So those 3 losses, all of them but Ole Miss, were very close, and I think Ole Miss is one of the better teams in all of college football. This is one of the best defenses in the sport, South Carolina does. Their weakness is their offensive line and a receiver core and a quarterback room that's a bit inconsistent. But I like South Carolina. I think they're one of the more underrated teams in all of college football, and they do what they can. I think their coordinators and their head coach has managed this team well with all of the kind of natural handicaps that the roster has incurred on the team. But this defense is a non-negotiable, especially that defensive line. It's a big part of the reason why they were able to compete with LSU, compete with Alabama. It was absolutely the reason why they dominated Vanderbilt and also Texas A&M. At number 11, we have the Miami Hurricanes. Miami, I'm just going to put it simply, because this is the first team on the list who I think can win it all. The reason why team number 11 through team number 1 I think can win it all is because this is a down year in football. This is also the only reason why I think Miami can win it all, because their staff, defensively and also head coach Mario Cristobal, are big problems that I think hold back the team. It's the same thing with their secondary, and their special teams per efficiency are a bit iffy. But quarterback Cam Ward is one of the best, if not the best, QBs in the nation. And their running back, wide receiver, and tight end rooms, and also their offensive line and defensive line are pretty darn good. Miami right now is 9-1, 5-1, coming off of a loss to Georgia Tech. If they win out, simply put, they're in the playoff. But if they incur a second loss, I think they're out due to how weak their schedule is and how weak the ACC is overall. At number 10th, not 12th, we already passed 12th. At number 10, we have the Georgia Bulldogs here. Georgia is 7-2. They're 5-2 in the SEC, coming off of a 28-10 loss to Ole Miss. They lost to Alabama earlier in the season. This is a defense that is strong. It is one of the better defenses in all of college football. I don't think it's the best, but it's close. Defensive tackle, defensive end, their secondary, their linebacker core, they have depth there. I think they're well coached. The problem is the offensive coaching is not where it needs to be. Carson Beck has honestly closer to a 1-to-1 TD-INT ratio than he does to a 3-to-1 TD-INT ratio. Running back isn't productive like Georgia wanted when they brought in Trevor Etienne. The offensive line has issues. They're clearly missing Ladd McConkey and also Brock Bowers, who are balling out in the NFL. This Georgia team has taken massive steps back from last season. Massive steps back. And there's a good chance they lose to Tennessee this weekend. And if Georgia Tech's healthy, I think Georgia Tech can beat them. So they need to win out. If they incur one more loss, I think they're out of the playoff conversation, especially given that the college football playoff rankings don't deviate that much from the AP and coaches poll, where Georgia is 10th in the coaches poll and 11th in the AP poll. It's do or die time right now for Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs. At number 9, I have the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee's 8-1. 5-1 in SEC play, and they have one weird loss to an Arkansas team who I think is vastly overrated. I don't think Arkansas is a good football team. I think they have some good players. I think they have a good coordinator in Bobby Petrino. But their losses to Oklahoma State, for example, and how Ole Miss just handled them was frankly embarrassing for where they are in power ratings. But Tennessee beat Alabama. Tennessee has a dominant defense. That's where they're strong at, along with running back Dylan Sampson. James Pierce Jr. is one of the better defensive ends in college football, projected to be a high-round draft pick. The weakness for this team, I think, is a little bit of the offensive line. It's a little bit of Nico Imaliava not performing to the level that we expected him to be at. And the receiver core isn't a 2022 level receiver core, for example. But this defense is really good. The SEC this season on defense has improved compared to where it was over the past 2 years, where I thought they were pretty overrated on the defensive side of the football. Now you have South Carolina, you got Georgia, Alabama took a big step up on defense against LSU, and Tennessee has their best defense ever under Josh Heupel, who's known as an offensive coach. This is a team who can win the national title. If they lose to Georgia, they're probably still in the playoff picture, but you would rather win out. And the reason I have them at 9th and not higher is because they've looked clunky ever since they came into SEC play, and their SEC schedule is not as tough as Georgia's or Florida's or Alabama's or even South Carolina's, for example. They have one of the easier SEC schedules. A lot of room to move up here for Tennessee. For Notre Dame, there isn't that much room to move up because no one's really tested them. I mean, the best team they played was A&M early in the year, who they beat. And A&M right now is a lot better than A&M was then. And Notre Dame lost to NIU at home. Yeah, they crushed Florida State. They crushed Navy, but those aren't good teams. And Louisville may be their best or one of their best wins, along with A&M. And they only beat them by a score. So there's not much resume-wise to suggest that Notre Dame is a national championship contender. But again, I think this is a down year in football. Notre Dame's 8-1. They've owned everyone left and right since that loss to NIU. They're undefeated outside of that game. Their center, their guard, their tackle, their offensive line, coached by Joe Rudolph, is awesome. I think Mike Denbrock's doing a good job offensively, helping this team to find and score points. Defensively, I love their D-tackle room, their linebacker room, and also their secondary, especially at safety. The weakness for them is their passing offense, where Riley Leonard improving week to week, but still not a great QB, and they have questions at wide receiver and tight end as well. At 7th, we have the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss is one of the best teams in college football, and despite the fact that they have 2 losses, and I thought they would have 2 losses in the preseason and actually miss the playoff, I thought they would have 2 losses and miss the playoff because, in my opinion, they would lose to LSU and Georgia. Well, it turns out that losing to Kentucky and LSU is better than losing to LSU and Georgia because at least you get a quality win. Ole Miss broke through. Lane Kiffin earned the big win. So he has my respects in that regard. Ole Miss is 8-2. 4-2, of course, losing to Kentucky and LSU by 1 score each, which is why they're top 5 in power ratings, despite losing to an LSU team who's not top 15 and a Kentucky team that's one of the worst Power 4 teams in the entire sport. Because close losses don't affect you all that much in power ratings, and that's kind of my logic too, is I think that Ole Miss is a team that can lose to a lot of teams, but that can beat anyone in college football. And they dominated Georgia. They did. Jackson Dart is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Their wide receiver room, even without Trey Harris, is one of the nation's best. Tight end and the defensive line, especially with Walter Nolan and Princely Unmanmalen, make up a great front that is just intimidating to any offensive line. They're weak a little bit on the offensive line, and running back is not where they want to be, but this is a team who can win it all. So they just win out. I think Ole Miss is in, and they can make some room, and they can shake some stuff in the playoffs. Number 6, I have the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana's undefeated. They're 10-0. They're 7-0 in the Big Ten. They have a bye this coming week. Their strengths, I think, are quarterback Curtis Rourke, an underrated and deep wide receiver room, a defensive front that over the past 2 weeks has held their opponents to an average of, I think, 15 or 20 rushing yards per game. And they also have, D'Angelo Pons at corner, and I think their corner room's good. And don't forget about Michael Kamara at defensive end, who is one of the Big Ten's better defensive ends. So this team's fundamentally sound. That, I think, is the biggest strength of Indiana. Ole Miss is more talented and has probably more upside than Indiana does in terms of a talent perspective. You can say the same with other teams that are behind Indiana at 6. But I think Indiana is the most fundamentally sound team in the entire country. They don't miss tackles. They're well coached. They know how to scheme up against any defense. And they're efficient. And they have blown out all the bad teams that they have played. And they've blown out some, I would say, average or above average teams. And they struggled a bit against Michigan, but they led 17-3 at the half. And I think they took their foot off the gas, took the pedal off the metal. And I don't think they should have done that. And if they didn't, I think they blow out Michigan in that game. Their weakness is guard with an injury they've sustained there. Running back doesn't have a lot of upside, but it is deep. And special teams, I also think, is a little bit of a shaky ground for the Hoosiers. But remember, for all of these teams, weaknesses are more so weak links. They're areas that are good, or maybe at the very worst above average nationally, but relative to the strengths of the roster, they look weak and are pale in comparison. Like, I think Indiana does have a good running back room nationally. It's nowhere near close to as productive as how their defensive line and offensive line and quarterback have been overall. And number 5, we have the Texas Longhorns. Texas is 8-1, 4-1 in SEC play. That loss to Georgia looks weirder and weirder the longer we go in the season, where you wonder if Texas was healthy. But yeah, I mean, you wonder if Texas is healthy, do they win that game? But that's what ifs, that's hypotheticals. What's done is done. The reality is that Texas has one of the better defenses in all of college football. I know they haven't played many offenses worth a lick, including Georgia's. For example, Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Ole Miss. We could go on and on. There are several elite defenses that would, I think, test Texas's defense, or elite offenses that would test Texas's defense. But Texas's defense is fast. They are fundamentally sound. They know how to force turnovers. It's a better defense. It's a much better defense than what they had last year. And last year's defensive front was no joke. It was very intimidating. The weakness of Texas, I think, is an offensive line that against Georgia sort of got exposed. I think tackle is very strong, but center and guard are weak links compared to the rest of the roster. And running back, with all the injuries that they've sustained in the preseason, I think they've handled adversity well in that running back room, but it's still weaker compared to most parts of Texas's roster. At number 4, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. This is my highest rated team in the entire SEC. And yes, they have 2 losses, to Vanderbilt and to Tennessee, both on the road. They beat Georgia, a game where if they don't take the pedal off the metal, they could have won by 4 scores. And they owned Missouri, owned LSU in their own stadium. Alabama, what's frustrating about them is they're very inconsistent. They're sort of like Ole Miss, except I think they have a higher floor and a higher ceiling than what Ole Miss has. When they are functioning, they are the best team in the country, or certainly one of the best teams in the country, when they are playing to their ceiling. When they are at their floor, they don't look like a top 10 team. They don't even look like a top 15 team. This is a team that, when healthy and when playing at their A game, is probably the nation's best. And when they are not, the depth concerns really show. I think Jalen Milroe is a strength of the team. I think that Jam Miller and Justice Haynes are strengths. I think that tight end, linebacker, and safety, when healthy, is a big strength of this team. The weaknesses here is a bit of the offensive line, especially when it comes to depth. I like guard, center, and tackle. I think have had some issues relative to the rest of the team. And on the defensive line, Alabama's good, but they're not special on the defensive line. Make no mistake about it. So Alabama's at 4th. This is a team where if they win out, they're definitely in, and they can certainly win a national championship under Kalen DeBoer, who I think is the best game manager head coach in all of college football. At number 3, I have the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State, in my opinion, has shown flashes of being a national championship team in every one of their games. Every single one of them, including the Ohio State game, but not anywhere on offense outside of Tyler Warren, but a lot on defense. They're 8-1, 5-1 overall. Only lost to Ohio State at home, where they had 2 red zone possessions that came up empty. I think they're very impressive at running back with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. They have the best tight end in the country in Tyler Warren. Their offensive line is strong. Their defensive tackle and defensive end units are also strong. They have one of the best D lines in all of college football. They're top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, 10th in both, according to ESPN's efficiency metrics. Their biggest weakness right now is James Franklin. Watching how they played against Washington and how they played against Wisconsin and how they played against West Virginia, you take those 3 games and I think to myself, they can win it all. But then you watch that Ohio State game, and if Franklin doesn't get out of the way, and at this point you got to say that he probably won't, then how are they going to beat Ohio State, especially? How are they going to beat Oregon? What will happen if they meet up with Alabama in a neutral field, not in Beaver Stadium? You have to ask these questions. If Penn State had better game management at head coach and also had better receivers, which is a huge weakness on the team, and a more reliable punter and also kicker from the start of the year, they would be in a better position to win it all. I'm very high on Penn State still, but they're 3rd in the Big Ten for a reason. Ahead of them is number 2 Ohio State. Ohio State, 8-1, 5-1 overall. They're strong at running back with Henderson and Judkins. I think that Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith make up the best wide receiver duo in all of college football. Seth McLaughlin's been impressive at center. And their defensive line, especially defensive tackle, has been great. And Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs make up the best safety, not center, but safety duo in the entire country. Only rivaled potentially by Alabama with Keon Sabb and Malachi Moore when they're healthy. Tight end, offensive tackle with some of the injuries they've sustained, and also special teams are a weakness for the Buckeyes. Their sole loss came by a point on the road to Oregon, who, if you can't already guess, is my number 1 team. Like all teams on this list, Ohio State does have their flaws that could prove fatal. Again, I want to reiterate this over and over again. And by down year in football, I do not mean that this is boring. This is a fun year in football. The 12-team playoff is going to be awesome. We have an extra week in football due to how the calendar works, which some hate. I sort of like it. The championship games with divisions abolished are probably going to be more entertaining than they ever have been before. However, in terms of team quality at the top, there is no peak Kirby Smart Georgia. There is no 2023 Michigan. There is no peak Clemson or peak Bama under Nick Saban. There's no 2019 LSU. There isn't. Ohio State's a team who could have 2 losses right now. They could also be undefeated. And right now, people are favoring them to win it all. They're favoring them to win the Big Ten. And there are many reasons why. And I could make a whole video on that. But I think that Ryan Day is an overhated coach in college football. He's one of college football's best game managers. If they just managed their offensive line better in terms of recruiting in the portal, I think this would be college football's number 1 team. And speaking of the number 1 team, we have the Oregon Ducks. They're 10-0. They're 7-0 in conference. The closest game they have played is that 1-point win over Ohio State, that 32-31 point win. Dylan Gabriel's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Jordan James and Noah Whittington make up an awesome running back room. Wide receiver, healthy or not, is awesome. And their offensive and defensive lines are Big Ten caliber. Oregon right now, I think, has one of the highest ceilings in football, if not the highest ceiling. And their floor, I wouldn't say their floor is the highest, given how they've struggled earlier in the year and their performance against Maryland this past weekend, for example. But they're very tactical. They are obsessed with winning. They have that Nick Saban, Kirby Smart mindset. You can see the influence of those 2 coaches on Dan Lanning and how this program is structured. I think that guard is a little bit of a weak link, but again, like most, if not all of these teams on the list outside of maybe Boise State and South Carolina and the teams on the lower end of things, weaknesses more so mean weak roster links. Oregon's guards are some of the best guards in the country. They're just not as productive as Oregon's quarterback room or wide receiver room, which are, I think, top 5 in the country easily. And also special teams with especially kicking issues, kicker health. That's been a little bit of an issue too, and the return game's been dead ever since that awesome performance against Boise State. And I think linebacker, while great, it's not as strong as the defensive line, and the secondary has been very, very impressive to me. So I think Oregon right now is the best team in football. They would be my national championship pick. I think they are the most balanced team in the sport. But again, teams number 11, the bottom of that national championship tier, from Miami all the way up to Oregon, I think can win it all. Obviously, the teams at the top, particularly, I would say Ole Miss, Indiana, Texas, Bama, Penn State, Ohio State, and Oregon, especially those, have much greater odds of winning it all than I think Miami does, for example. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm glad that you could check on in my top 15 power ratings. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Connor Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Please check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I will see you all very soon. Have a great day.